Friday night. It's going to be a windy weekend.
I know, right? Yeah, super windy. I don't really remember too many times, watching the local news and them commenting on everything that was going to be shut down and
Hmm.
all the events that have been canceled this weekend.
Yeah.
It must be really bad coming in. They said 65 miles an hour in some parts of town tomorrow. So,
I'm
but it
not
could
too
be
much
worse.
far out.
John, it could be worse. We could be up in northern Nevada, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Snow along with it. So. But yeah, it's maybe an indoor training weekend
Hmm.
this weekend, which that's fine, right? It's the winter.
Yeah.
Um, got to do what we got to do. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's kind of obvious to those people that are watching that I've got some face issues, and I'm gonna
Mhm.
change my saturation really quick so see what it really looks like. There,
Well,
there
that's a different saturation.
you go. That's a normal saturation.
Yeah.
We're going to turn it back down so I don't freak everybody out. But so speaking of being indoors, I've been going through some pre-cancer treatments for skin cancer on my face, and this is treatment 5 of 6 that I've done. And just wanted to once again give a shout out to making sure like triathletes are taking care of their skin when they're out there, and you know it's really easy to forget your sunscreen
Hmm.
and really easy to forget to reapply, especially on those long rides. You're out for
Hmm.
5, 6 hours. So just a little shout out to make sure everyone is doing their best to stay sun protected.
Yeah, it's hard, it is easy, as you said, you're going out and you're like, oh, one more thing to do, and put some sunscreen on. But boy, it is you gotta do it, especially around here. And growing up, I mean, we were in the era where sunscreen really wasn't, built into the natural uh, day to life or day to day living. And but now, now we're here in the Southwest, so important to put sunscreen on. I actually, when I go for my bike rides, especially, I actually do wear long sleeve jerseys now, so at least so I'm not having to put it on my arms at that point. So I'm trying to cover up as much as I can.
Yeah, I mean it's a new world we're living in too, right? Like
Hmm.
we do know about like the depletion of the ozone layer and all of
Yeah.
these other things, and yeah, I think that this is the new reality, and I, I honestly haven't been too careful up until the last few years, and
Hmm.
I regret it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I regret it now, and you know, I'm trying to be proactive in taking care of myself because
Hmm.
like, you only get one skin, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So,
Well,
anyways,
I hope it goes well. And like anything, you just got to be patient. And I know it's tough, but
it's just another one of these things that I've been
yeah,
dealing with this year, but
yeah.
that's cool because honestly, John, this was a good week in some ways as well, right? So
Hmm.
we had the rock and roll 10K, which we talked about already, and
Yeah.
then Tuesday night was the final for me for the Zwift Racing League season 3,
Oh, cool.
which was really hard because it was a team time trial, and on those, it was 58 minutes at threshold basically,
Oh boy.
and after doing a 10K at threshold 2 days earlier, my
Yeah.
legs were shot,
Trashed.
and my
Yeah.
nervous system was when I finished,
Oh boy.
I was trashed.
Hmm.
And the good news is my team won, and
Awesome. Congratulations.
we're actually undefeated this season. And so playoffs are not for until April, so we got some
Okay.
time.
So you
Um,
get a digital trophy?
so if you win in the playoffs, so we didn't win last year. We actually lost in the final. It was a team time trial in the final.
Mm.
We lost by like a tenth of a second.
Hmm. Oh
The
boy.
trophy is actually you get a special helmet that only winners of the Zwift Racing League get
Oh boy.
for Zwift.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, so I think we got a good shot this year.
Awesome.
But yeah, so it'll be kind of fun to see. But yeah, it was super tough to do 2 threshold like efforts
Yeah.
in 3 days.
Hmm.
I actually have done nothing since. Well, I did the skin treatment on Wednesday, and like
Hmm.
my face is on fire, and so
Right.
just
Right. Right.
doing anything and stuff. I actually just before this, I got off the treadmill. I just did like a 20-minute
Hmm.
easy
Hmm.
jogging on the treadmill. That's the first thing I've done because when your face is like this, I'm telling you, it's hard to exercise. So
No, and that's inflammation, and we talk about stress as stress, and so important to be smart with that.
yeah, and the skin. I mean, you take a lot of stress in through the skin, right? I think everybody knows it's the largest organ of the body.
Mm-hmm.
It is an organ, and you're right. Like when you have inflammation there, your load of inflammation goes up, and the response to inflammation. And this actually we haven't talked much about this, but the response to inflammation, you only have so many cells that are
Mm-hmm.
responders to inflammation.
Yeah.
And so, like exercising when you have other inflammatory things going on, it's it's cumulative, and
Mm-hmm.
I know you know a lot about that. Um, just a little bit of stress on top of an inflammatory condition can put you in a little bit of a tailspin. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely.
Yeah, when I worked in cardiac rehab 25, 30 years ago, whatever it is, I worked right next to the physical therapy clinic for the same hospital, and they treated burn victims. And that's where I learned more about how important the skin was to all sorts of things, metabolism, thermal regulation, and it's a serious injury when you have injury to the skin.
Yeah. It's interesting too, like you talk about like the metabolic rate, because it is an organ, right? Like when you
Yeah.
damage,
Hmm.
this is something that I'd learned about with burn victims as well, is like they need a lot of calories.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Even though they're not moving, like
Hmm.
because of the pure metabolic power it takes
Yeah.
to heal and to
Hmm.
heal the skin. It's pretty amazing that you don't think like that. You think, oh, the muscles need the calories, the
Right.
brain
Right.
needs the calories, but your skin is constantly, even if it's healthy, it's constantly
Hmm.
evolving, right? You're
Yeah.
constantly losing skin cells and
Replacing the
cells, and
skin cells and yeah.
that takes energy and protein synthesis and all of
Hmm.
the things that ultimately you tend not to think about, but it's
Hmm. Hmm.
actually a thing. And so, anyways, let's move
Yeah.
on from skin.
Hmm.
Um, I sent you an article today that was from Medscape, and I get these things through. I don't know if you've signed up for things like that at work, but basically, it's to I always want to be on the kind of the cutting edge of what's happening in medicine. And I get a lot of stuff from I teach a sports pharmacology class, and I
Hmm.
get a lot of stuff from this that helps me with those lectures. But this one
Yeah.
was an interesting one because rarely do I see a topic like this. So, and as the rest of the internet, it's clickbait.
Yeah.
It says, "Is stretching now underrated?"
Hmm.
Accumulating research says yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'm going to put a link to the article in
yeah,
the
on the Facebook
notes.
page,
Yeah.
that'd be great. So
And let's preface this. We purposely did not talk about this
yes,
before we went live. And I think that's important because this is going to be fun to get each of our reaction to this article because we have talked about stretching before.
yeah. So we have, and the cool thing with us is you and I continue to evolve,
Yep.
right? And how we did things 10 years ago is not how we do things today.
Hmm.
And I think you probably like that with your students as well. Like I'm constantly telling them, hey, like you need to continue to evolve as
Hmm.
new information comes into you. You need to be able to
Evaluate it.
take it,
Hmm.
evaluate it, and potentially change what you do.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so like I'm always reading and always listening and learning and doing webinars and doing all these different things. And my opinion changes. Like
Yeah.
my opinion is on two or three things is different this week than it was last week.
Hmm.
I'm super proud of that.
Well, and I would say, I would rephrase that a bit. I would say your understanding of the situation changes because I don't think it's an opinion. You have some ideas based upon what we know right now, and
Yep.
both of us do. In essence, that's what a hypothesis is. It's a statement we believe to be true based upon what we know. But as we learn more, those statements can change and evolve, as you say. And I think that's an important part of science is that we are always asking, we're always questioning, and we're trying to design experiments to actually refute our ideas. But it is really important that for good scientists, you can't hold on to beliefs. You have to
Exactly.
really evaluate the information that's out there and then make new statements that you believe to be true.
And the truth is, like, this is the evidence-based triathlete podcast, and
Yeah.
the evidence is one thing, but really what this is the culmination of evidence. And I tell my students this all the time. It's wisdom,
Yeah.
right? You're not trying to learn facts. You're
Hmm.
trying to become wise,
Right.
so you can practice.
Hmm.
And even in the world of triathlon, like I train completely different than I did 7 years ago,
Hmm. Hmm.
years ago, right? Because I've learned and I've evolved and
Hmm.
I've become more wise.
Yeah.
I race more wise.
Hmm.
There was, it's funny because we've had many podcasts where we talk about the mistakes we make trying doing triathlon, but my mistakes tend to be smaller and smaller,
Yeah. Right. Right.
right? I
Hmm.
don't make the egregious mistake anymore. I tell
Yeah.
you, I hope I won't,
Hmm.
right? And that's wisdom that
Hmm.
has allowed that to happen. Um, so anyways, the reason why we're making this preface is because we have talked about stretching and we've talked about our thoughts on it. I'm going to start off by telling you this. I cannot tell you how many people that I've worked with, both as an athletic trainer, as a mentor to my students, as this whatever, just walking in my neighborhood, honestly, walking in my neighborhood, when people say, "Oh my gosh, if I only stretched more,"
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Oh, stretching is so important.
Right.
And then I'm like, yeah, maybe,
Hmm.
maybe it is, and maybe it's not.
Hmm.
And this is in science this happens a lot, right? We have evidence points us in one way and we have evidence
Right.
that points us other ways, and you have to read the studies and get into the nuance of it. But with all that being said, I'm going to ask you, John,
Mhm.
how often do you spend dedicated time stretching?
Across my lifespan,
I know, let's say in
I,
the last month.
I've never been a big stretcher, and I've done, I'll often stretch if I'm, casually maybe watching a TV show or something that, um, but I don't often purposefully say, oh, I'm going to stretch for the next 15, 30 minutes. I've dabbled in trying to do yoga, um, but that did not last. So I would say I don't stretch a lot, but I do think often about the health of the muscle tendon unit. And so I try to think about doing things that make that muscle tendon unit healthy and usable throughout a range of motion. So I don't do static stretching specifically, but thinking about the muscle tendon unit as a healthy unit is something I'm very purposeful about.
And I love the fact that you said I don't do static stretching, but I'm conscious of that, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things is that there are many ways to stretch,
Yeah.
right? If you squat down to pick something up,
Hmm.
you're actually stretching,
Right.
right? And you're elongating the system. Um, and if so, I would contend that there are certain professions and certain sporting events where the event itself is the stretching,
Hmm.
right? But for people that are relatively sedentary, I think that this is actually really, really important. And
Hmm.
that's kind of like this is where this is kind of clickbaity, right? Well, one of the conclusions of this study was basically that this was I'll read it. Among Korean adults who did flexibility exercise at least 5 times a week had a 20% lower risk of dying during the follow-up period from those who didn't stretch at all.
Hmm.
Well, and then it goes on to say this was slightly better than the risk reduction associated with high volumes of aerobic exercise and resistance training. So basically, they're saying it's better than endurance training and better than resistance training.
Right. Right.
Well, that sounds really good if you want to live a long time,
Hmm.
right? And it also sounds good if you want to be able to move.
Hmm.
Right? And so the question is the flexibility exercise allowing these people to move longer into their life?
Yeah, and I didn't go and look at the study, and because we exchanged this message today and on this article, and it would be interesting to go and look at the study because that was my first thought is, well, what's happening for their lifestyle for the group that is in the stretching group, because there's other things that can be happening that ultimately may positively impact the death rate, if you will, or mitigate that death rate. So it would be interesting to know, because they do mention it, it's a study that was done in Korea, what what else was going on. I can think back to a study that was looking at bone density and something, and it was some type of impact. And it came to be known that with the intervention that the researcher was testing did show that bone density increased. And people, queried what was going on, what was going on. Well, it did turn out that they were very low active, a low active population, and part of getting to where they could do the intervention was up a couple of flights of stairs. And then all of a sudden, people are like, "Well, wait a second, maybe it was the walking that was added into the intervention, or that was accidentally added into the intervention that maybe was impacting bone density." So there's other things that can influence the outcome of a study besides the one thing that is being looked at.
And so I do have the study up.
Oh,
Um,
good. Okay.
and so it's kind of fun because I'll just go with the conclusion, which is even better, right? Because this
Hmm.
is not what the the Medscape article kind of says, but
Yeah.
here's the conclusion, one sentence. Our data suggests that aerobic, muscle strengthening, and flexibility activities are associated with lower risks of mortality.
Mm.
So they're
Hmm.
saying all.
Yeah.
Now, in the data, yes, flexibility was a little bit better
Right.
if it
Right.
was kind of alone. But
Hmm.
my thing is like, why would I do it just by itself?
Hmm.
Right? If
Hmm.
all are associated, I should be
Yep.
doing all,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I think that's like once again, this is clickbaity. Like, oh, well, I don't need to do my
Hmm.
strength training and aerobic training. I can just
Yeah.
stretch and have a long life. Well, why wouldn't you do all if all are associated with it?
Hmm. Hmm.
And the way I look at it as a triathlete is like, I know I got the aerobic side covered,
Right. Right.
right? And I probably have some of the strength covered as well because I do strength training,
Hmm.
a couple times a week. Um, and then my strength training, I make sure when I do it, actually, I have a very much of a flexibility component to it.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I got to be honest with you, I do some static stretching post exercise. And we'll talk about the kind of the routines and things that we can do.
Hmm.
But yeah, like we've known this a long time. There are some components to physical fitness,
Yeah.
right? So we just named some. So there's strength, there's aerobic ability, there's flexibility. So John, you probably took an exercise phys class at one point or other. What are some of the others?
The other for what?
Components of fitness.
For fitness, no, I mean, mental health is
Mental
one.
health. Yep,
Cardiovascular
yep.
improvements.
Muscular endurance
Yep.
is probably there. Some people might say agility,
Mm-hmm.
balance, right? Balance or
Yep.
proprioception. So all of these are components that I firmly believe, and once in this is my belief. Actually, the research backs this up that all of those are components to having a long health span,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And just putting all your eggs in one basket is probably
Right.
not a good idea. Um, the other thing that I think is really interesting, and this is something that a professor taught me. Oh, this is back when I was at school in Canada, and we're talking about the components of fitness. And he said, the fun thing is that the only thing that out of all of those components of fitness, like of actual physical fitness, not the mental side,
Mm-hmm.
that actually old people have been able to do better and not have a decline is a flexibility
Mm-hmm.
if you keep working at it, right? So
Yeah.
like, and he showed a picture of like a 104-year-old yogi putting his
Yeah.
feet
Yeah. Right. Right.
right, like when you're 100 and plus years old, your cardiovascular system will not be as good as it was when it was 20.
Yeah.
Your muscle strength, sarcopenia will happen. Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
all balance goes down. All of these things
Yeah.
go down, but actually stretching will go down if you don't do anything about it.
Right.
Or flexibility will go down. Sorry, not we should say stretching. Range of motion will go down. But I always kind of had that in the back of my mind. It's like, yeah, that's kind of true, right? We
Mm-hmm.
do see some of these older people that are able to actually maintain flexibility, and it's kind of a fun way to think about it. Like, well, maybe John, one day you and I won't be able to run and bike, but maybe we can have a good stretching class.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. So with that article in front of you,
Yep.
did they do the stretching intervention and the aerobic intervention in groups, or was it done individually? Did you catch that? Because that's one of the, because when you talk about fitness and the benefits of physical fitness, part of it is psychosocial,
Yeah.
and having that interaction with other people can actually engage or can activate a benefit.
So they didn't mention it.
Okay, okay.
So it basically says engagement in walking, aerobic, muscle strength, and flexibility physical activities was reported at baseline. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, and it said basically they did an adjustment for potential confounders. But anyways, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just more. It was good to like kind of start to talk about this because there was a few other pieces of this of the Medscape article, and they actually interviewed a professor from Canada who actually is really well known in the stretching world, and they basically talked about the benefits of
Hmm.
stretching.
Hmm.
And this is the first one I really wanted to talk about because this is actually something that I've been trying to elucidate to my students as well, is that stretching by itself can actually increase strength.
Hmm.
And what happens is, especially in the muscles that are your long muscles, so think of like your quadriceps and your hamstrings, as we stretch them and as we lengthen them, especially if you do it under tension, so you put a little bit of weight, you can actually add, for simplicity terms, muscle cells.
Hmm.
There's actually a response to that tension that can
Right.
actually add muscle cells to the system. Now, the researcher was saying that yes, that does happen. Not as good as if you're doing a strength training,
Hmm.
but there is a response to
Hmm.
a muscular response to tension. And I think
Hmm.
that's a really interesting one as well. So if we think about like a triathlete, and at the end of their session, if they do a little bit of stretching, maybe we're actually stimulating some protein synthesis and some actually new muscle cell proliferation.
Right, right.
Were you familiar with that?
I am trying to think back to some of my motor classes, and there are cells that are stimulated when they are under tension. And so I think that is what that part is referring to. And so it does make sense that if you put tension on a muscle, you're going to get a positive response and strength somehow. And so that does have some physiological basis to it.
And I think sometimes there's a misconception that when you stretch, you're actually like tearing things apart.
Hmm. Hmm.
You really don't see that. You know, it's not like you're tearing things apart. Actually, it's a stimulatory thing, right? You
Right.
actually upregulate the nervous system, and the cells. There are some cells in the tendon, in particular, called teneocytes.
Hmm.
And those cells are stimulated by tension.
Right.
And we talked about them before. We're talking about doing eccentric stuff to strengthen tendons, but just stretching. Sometimes people think, well, stretching is going to elongate the tendon.
Hmm.
Probably not. Actually, if anything, stretching will make the tendon more robust.
Hmm. Hmm.
Stretching tends to actually make muscles longer, not
Right.
tendons longer. So it really interesting to me that this was actually brought up because I've only kind of heard this in the dark rooms of
Hmm.
of textbooks and a little blurb at the end. Oh, and by the way,
Yeah, yeah.
right? But
Well,
that was an interesting little comment.
the other interesting part that this article raised, which I hadn't really thought about, but when you do stop and think about it, it makes perfect sense, is the increase in blood flow and flexibility of arterial and venous system. That
Yeah.
actually makes a lot of sense, and I hadn't really thought about stretching in that light, and keeping the blood circulation uh, as a healthy system and flexible.
Well, if you think about it, right, like, and we don't think about this because, maybe you might because of your work in cardiac rehab a long time ago, but the blood vessels are sitting in fascia,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just like the muscles are sitting in fascia, and they're right up against one another, right? You got your muscle and you got your venous system and your arterial system kind of back to back. And if the muscles are moving and the fascia layers are moving, you you actually probably can stimulate like the
Mm-hmm.
lengthening of these uh, blood vessels.
Right.
And if even not the lengthening, maybe just a stimulus to them, like this is a deep word, but like the mechanotransduction is the word.
Mm-hmm.
The stimulus of a biologic system to a stress.
Yeah.
And yeah, this one I never really thought about it either till today.
Yeah, no, so that was neat. That was I like to read things and see something different like that, and gets me thinking a little bit, because I did think when I saw this article and read through it, I did think back to there was a couple studies I was part of with a colleague in physical therapy, Harvey Wallman, who actually did a number of publications on this idea of how stretching can negatively influence performance. And I think I've talked about this study in the past, but it was actually pretty surprising to me. I remember him saying that stretching could, negatively influence a vertical jump. And I'm like, I don't think so. And so we actually did the experiment. And lo and behold, after static stretching, the subjects did jump about a centimeter lower versus not static stretching. And the other conditions were either doing, it was a dynamic warm up, is what it was, or I think it was the other, and then there was a third condition. I think it was dynamic plus static. And the static only was the group that was the lowest jumping performance. Everyone did all conditions, but at the end of the day, after doing static jumping. And the idea is all predicated on the length tension relationship, or one of the explanations of that is. And that muscle can generate the most force when it's in a certain length. And if you stretch a muscle and it becomes longer, you actually put it in a weaker position. I always show my class, strength length tension relationship, grab your fingers and squeeze, and then go through a lot of wrist extension and try to squeeze. You can't squeeze as hard. Why? Because the muscles that are contributing to squeezing are actually stretched longer. And same thing if you go in a flex position and try to grip, you just can't grip as much because the muscle's length is different. So that's part of the explanation for why the stretching was negatively influencing the jump height. But what I liked about this paper was they put that type of research into a bin, which I think was correctly put in, that it was more extreme static stretching. It was holding a stretch for 60 seconds. I don't remember what we did, but
I
it
think
was
you
a
only
long
did,
static stretch.
I think you did. You might have done 60. That
Yeah,
study.
yeah. And so when you do a long static stretch, that can negatively influence. And again, this paper that you sent me also highlighted that effect can get washed out pretty quick,
Yeah, really
by
quick.
doing some other things. And so it is really testing a jump, in this case, a jump as soon as possible after finishing the static stretch that would have been some long static stretch. I don't know, how long do you static stretch? When you do a stretch, how long do you hold it for?
30 seconds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because that's what the research says is kind of the butter zone for like when you get the best effects.
Hmm.
The thing to remember with stretching, and this is getting a little deep, but um, stretching itself like you were saying, it's relatively transient.
Hmm.
Like, you stretch, like if I was to lay you down on a table right now and stretch your hamstring, you would get more range of motion instantly.
Right.
But if I checked you in an hour, it'd be gone.
Hmm.
Right? So the thought process is this needs to be repetitive over time, and then we over time we call them plastic changes rather than elastic
Yep.
changes. So like one bout of stretching is not making you, it might make you more flexible like right away,
Right.
but it's not like really like over time. I wanted to add back to the arterial thing because I had the
Yeah.
paper for
Oh,
that.
yeah. Go ahead.
So, and I'm just going to read the results. So this is really cool. And once again, because you and I had not much about this, but this was a meta-analysis, John. So which is
Hmm.
even better. It says the results of the present meta-analysis demonstrate that stretching exercises reduced arterial stiffness and improved endothelial function compared with control. Furthermore, stretching exercises decreased resting heart rate and I don't know what DBT is, distal blood pressure, or
Okay.
diastolic blood pressure.
Hmm.
Super cool, right? Like
Yeah.
just stretching reduced your heart rate. So that's gonna and if a lower blood pressure as well, that means that they became more elastic.
Hmm.
Like the which is to me like that's one of the reasons we want to exercise.
Yeah. Right.
Or we want to do our aerobic and our strength conditioning exercises for our cardiovascular system. So that's
Exercise is medicine.
that's super
Hmm.
cool. Like I have to share this with my students because once again, this is new to me, like
Yeah.
today, new to me. And
Hmm.
I love that, like
Hmm.
learning something new,
Hmm.
that, just kind of opened my eyes. Yeah. So back to your point with the static stretching, The other thing is that you were talking more about like decreases in power,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because really, like a jump test is really it's a measure of power,
Right.
right? The other study that was pretty prevalent during that time that you guys were doing that work was a sprint study, and they
Mm-hmm.
took football players and they did 40-yard dashes,
Right.
and same thing, the static stretching group, especially they static stretch and then they did that, the speeds went down.
Mm-hmm.
That's a power thing.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anybody do this study, replicate the study on aerobic capacity,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Have them do like, a bunch of 60-second stretches and then, hey, go run a half marathon.
Right.
I'm guessing there'd be no difference,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the washout would happen.
Yeah.
And really, we're not really too concerned with power.
Mm-hmm.
So just once again, for
Yeah,
the
I think you're
triathlete,
right because I think the studies that did combine static and dynamic, it's washed out at that point.
right?
So it's not, it's more something attributed to static stretching. And so, yeah, so don't, if you do static stretching though, what this article is showing is you can still get some benefits, but just don't do it for 60 seconds.
Do it short, and then, but I still am a believer of this.
Mm-hmm.
Evidence says because stretching before doesn't prevent injuries and doesn't actually stretching right before exercise doesn't improve performance, we might as well do it at the end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because when you're the most warm is probably the time to do this, right? So
Yeah.
like you have the most blood flow. Um, yeah, your muscles are the warmest they're going to be right when you finish.
Mm-hmm.
So like for me, like I never stretch before.
Right.
If I get it done, so I always stretch afterwards because
Mm-hmm.
I always.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to, I always do it
Mm-hmm.
afterwards. And then for me personally, like if I'm out for a run and I'm feeling, oh, you know what, gosh, my hip flexor's feeling just a little bit tight
Mm-hmm.
today.
Mm-hmm.
That tends to go away as you run, as you
Yeah.
warm up, and then, but I kind of make a mental note, hey, like let's make sure when we finish, we stretch our hip flexor a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Well, and what the other part of this article that caught my eye though is the running economy.
Yes. Oh, I know. I wanted to talk about this too. It's on my list. So talk about
Okay. Yeah. So I saw that, and that's where I did go check the literature, and I wanted to just see quickly. Now, I only did a quick search,
it. Yeah.
and I found some papers, then I found some lit reviews, meta-analysis as well, and it's a mixed bag, is what I saw. It's not as definitive as this paper stated that or flexibility can yield better running economy. I actually saw more of a mixed bag of results. And what I was thinking as I read it, and ultimately the authors concluded this, I'm like, well, no one's put inflexible runners in one group and flexible runners in another group. You're just putting people all together. And some people, when you start a study, they may be really inflexible and some may be really flexible, but they're treating them all as the same. And so that's actually what the lit reviewer actually concluded was, hey, there needs to be a study on people who are inflexible and what happens with them with improving their flexibility and seeing what happens with running economy. And then people who are already flexible, what would happen with them and their running economy.
I hate the literature in this area. It's like students ask me the questions, and I'm like, we don't know. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because you read some like articles that will basically say, hey, if you should never stretch your calves if
Mm-hmm.
you're a runner
Mm-hmm.
because you need the springiness, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
Like,
Right.
you need that,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're like, well, but then you read another article that says if you don't have enough dorsiflexion when you run, you potentially will have hip issues,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So and this is what I teach. And I'll just tell you, like, we should be charging once again tuition for this.
Mm-hmm.
You should, in my opinion, only be trying to increase flexibility to what you need to do for your sport.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like if performance is the goal,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm not talking about arterial stiffness and stuff like, but if you want to run well, if you've got 20 degrees of, let's say, dorsiflexion, which is kind of our minimum number we want, I don't see any benefits of having 30 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely, if you have 5 degrees, we know that actually is one of the, for many people, will actually increase their risk of injury, right? So I think that's a problem in the literature, right? Because once again, they take a bunch of people, and some people may start out at this, and some at 5, and some are going to start out at 20, and some are going to start at 30. This is just one measure,
Yeah.
in degrees, and they throw them all together, and they give them an intervention, and the person that's already high,
Hmm.
it washes it out, and
Yeah. Right.
yeah, I love the study design that you're talking about, and
Hmm.
if we didn't have a million things going on already, which we were talking about earlier today, this would be a great study.
Yeah, it would be, and it wouldn't be too hard to do. You just have to find enough people
Yeah.
on those extreme ends. But this is a classic issue of when we average everyone together, that we sort of mask out the individual responses. And this is when you read the literature, you just have to have an eye open for something like that could be happening, especially when you see a parameter not change. So if running economy isn't influenced by static stretching, I actually like to go into the individual studies or subjects and start to see, well, did some people go up and did some
Right.
people go down? And why did they go up and why did they go down? And that leads to this type of study where it may be related to the level of flexibility someone's starting with.
So the other one I was going to throw out with this is, and this happens to a lot of people that once in I work with when I do the analysis, and I change the way they run.
Yeah.
The running economy goes down,
Mm-hmm.
even if they're running better,
Sure.
right? And I tell them this. I say, hey, listen, like your heart rate's gonna go up for a while
Yep.
until you get used to, like,
Mm-hmm.
let's say that one of the metrics we're gonna change is just cadence, right? Until you get used to the new
Yep.
cadence,
Mm-hmm.
your heart rate's gonna be higher. You're gonna be breathing harder,
Yeah.
but in a couple weeks you'll become efficient with that. So if the study is not long enough where they actually can
Mm-hmm.
kind of retrain their system on how to run with, let's say they gain flexibility,
Mm-hmm.
if they didn't train themselves on how to deal with that new flexibility,
Right.
their running economy is going to go down,
Yeah.
right? So these are long term. These would be some long term studies,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then you'd have to control, like, this gets deep because then you have to control their training could only be like level,
Yeah.
right? So you're gonna have like an 8 week study, and like, hey, listen, you got to run 30 miles a week, and at this pace, or you can run 4 times, and you can run 4 times. It's got to be, and everyone's got to be the same. Like,
Yeah.
these are difficult studies, and probably why they're not out there, because they're really
Yeah.
difficult.
Well, and the lit review I found actually just highlights that point, is that they started off with over 1,000 papers that they found. And then through different criteria of excluding papers, which we would do in a meta-analysis, you set a criteria for what stays and what goes. They ended up with 11 papers. And that just amplifies how hard it is to do good research like that over, doing a flexibility or any type of training study. It's not easy. It's not easy to really design an experiment where you can really point back to the intervention having the influence. Because yeah, you're right. If you're looking at a flexibility study and you got a subject who goes out and does an iron distance race in the midst of your study, I mean, that's going to throw all your results off.
Because I tell you what, like on Wednesday morning after I did those 2 events, my flexibility was horrible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, it
Right,
was way
right,
worse than it was on Saturday.
right, right.
But did anything change in my,
Mm-hmm.
no, it's probably more just like actually interstitial swelling and
Yep,
pressure
that's right.
on nerves, interstitial pressure on nerves that are
Mm-hmm.
causing that. But if
Mm-hmm.
you measure me,
Yep.
oh man, you know, hey, racing decreases flexibility.
Yeah, yeah, right, right, right.
That'd be the headline.
Yeah,
And John, that's the study we should do,
yeah,
is do a free half Ironman
yeah,
Saturday measure of everybody, have them race, and then the day after stretch them, look at their flexibility the next day.
yeah,
It's going to be lower,
yeah, right, right.
right? So we should be telling people, hey, don't race because
Mm-hmm.
it'll
Yeah.
decrease your flexibility.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
So it's
Yeah,
right. So
what
these
was
are
it, the Ironman shuffle, post-race shuffle after an Ironman, that
like,
walk that you do after a marathon, or people are going to do Revel marathon. Their flexibility is going to be pretty low a couple of days after finishing that downhill marathon.
okay. So the last little piece here was stretching benefit number 4 was fewer injuries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, when you stretch, the point where you feel tension is where the muscle is most vulnerable. That's where injuries usually happen. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so clickbait. I believe this in
Mm-hmm.
some ways, right? Once again, stretching before doesn't reduce your injury, but I'm going to give you an example in swimming because we've been talking a lot about running. If you are constantly trying to elongate out of the front of your stroke, right? So to a horizontal, more of a horizontal position,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have enough um, shoulder flexibility, and we call this flexion,
Yeah.
to actually do that, and you get right to the end range, and then you tension it,
Mm-hmm.
because you were talking about leg and tension curve. One of the things that happens is when you're at the very elongated positions, if you put a lot of strain on the muscle at that point,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there actually is an increased risk of injury.
Yeah.
So this kind of goes back to, do you have the flexibility within the range that you need to do
Mm-hmm.
your sport?
Yeah.
Because if you don't, and you're actually putting tension on things at the very end ranges, especially when we have elastic contraction at that
Mm-hmm.
point, like stored elastic energy contraction at the point, yes, you can actually do damage. So my kind of take home message is this is like, you need to probably maybe work with somebody, have them do some measurements against, and one thing, there are norm tables for all of these sports. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
how much shoulder flexion do I need to do freestyle swimming?
Right.
Like, you can find this data. And if you're within those normal ranges, I think stretching is not going to reduce your injuries.
Mm-hmm.
If you're outside those, it very well, stretching could reduce those injuries.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. And there's still there's no definitive research on the relationship between flexibility and injury. Other than what they're talking about here with longevity.
Well, but John, I think there actually is in certain contexts of certain in sports where you need to have certain
Right.
flexibilities to do it. So I'll give you
Mm-hmm.
another example then for triathlon.
Mm.
If you get set them into a too aggressive position on your bike
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have the flexibility to do it,
Right. Right. Right.
you can
Right.
injure your back,
Yeah.
right? This is actually, there's lots of, you go in a slow twitch, oh, I hurt my back again, and I had to raise my handlebars.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So could you over time gain that flexibility so you could do that position? Yeah, you
Mm-hmm.
could, and you would. So it's not that it was like the one time, it was like it's over time
Yeah.
of being closer to the end range
Mm-hmm.
or past where your natural end range is, and you're forcing it and then producing power in those end ranges time after time after time. I think that there's good evidence to
Mm.
support that.
Okay, that's good to hear. So let me ask you, as a practitioner, if you're trying to increase range of motion of a joint or flexibility or extensibility of a muscle, do you always just focus on that joint or that muscle, or do you
No,
stretch elsewhere?
yeah. So this is so interesting. This is, I mean, I don't even know how to answer that, because the answer is I absolutely look other places,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because these tensions that we perceive are often uh, they're the canary in the coal mine.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're feeling the tension in your calf because I don't know, throw up something, because your hip flexor is too tight,
Yeah.
right? So we stretch the calf, and it doesn't solve the problem,
Right.
right? Calf is becoming hypertonic, or the feeling of tightness in it, because it's working in an inefficient way to make up for the lack of flexibility somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And once again, these are super, super difficult things. You know, there are a handful of clinicians that I know of that can actually go to that level with
Mm.
a particular sport.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So thinking like an athletic trainer that's working with a track and field team all of the time, or a cross country team all the time, they're doing it day after day after day after day.
Yeah.
It could take a long time to actually learn this,
Mm-hmm.
and to do it for like multiple sports.
Yeah.
Like I'm pretty good with running mechanics. I'm in understanding the dynamic in running mechanics, and it's the dynamic on 3 planes,
Yeah.
right? because it's not just, forward, back. We have rotation and we have side to side motion. And I'm still learning and
Yeah.
becoming a student of that.
Hmm.
In the shoulder for swimming, I'm still like scratching the surface.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that if I was to, work with a high level swim team, let's say I worked for the UNLV swim team for
Yeah.
a few years. I think it would take a few years to really like dial it in and look at patient after patient and seeing what you're, seeing the common threads and the common areas, and then to add it, in swimming, and then the strokes,
Yeah.
right? If someone's just a distance swimmer and they're basically only doing freestyle compared to somebody that's doing IM,
Mm-hmm.
and so this is some nuanced stuff, and I guess I want to kind of close this little tirade, as it were, saying like just stretching is not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because if you're stretching into a dysfunction,
Mm-hmm.
you could potentially actually be doing more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you an example. And I'm not saying don't stretch your hamstrings, but I'm saying don't stretch your hamstrings.
Yeah. Right.
And because one of the common things in our society these days is an anterior pelvic tilt, and I think we've
Mm-hmm.
talked a little bit about this. It's the position of basically your pelvis is kind of like tilting forward.
Mm-hmm.
So when that happens, you're actually elongating your hamstrings all of the time, right? And they feel tight because they're under tension.
Right.
But if you just put more tension on them, even through a passive like a stretch, you actually could be leading to the dysfunction.
Interesting. Yeah.
And even if you test yourself and like, oh, these are tight and I can't go,
Right.
well, they're tight because the pelvis is already rotated
Yeah.
forward. And like these are some nuanced things. And when I used to work in soccer, it used to really bother me that these kids would all sit in a circle and stretch.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And I got
That's
a kid
classic.
that's putting their nose. I got a kid putting their nose to their knee,
Uh-huh.
and I'm like, do you really think this person needs to be stretching their hamstrings more?
Right. Right.
Right? But they had to because the coach was like there, and like, oh, you got to
Way
feel
we did
that
it.
stretch,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, well, they potentially are dysfunctional already.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're putting it further. So I think that there's some stretches that would be good for runners, good for cyclists in general, and good for swimmers in general.
Mm-hmm.
But just stretching everything, or even stretching what feels tight, may not be the answer.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Mm-hmm.
really difficult thing, and I hate to kind of like end our hour on that. Um, so this is where you have to probably do some reading for yourself and some understanding of this stuff, and maybe John will book a guru on the podcast to talk about this and these
Yeah.
dysfunctions.
No, that'd be great.
I have a few in town that I know really well that are
Mm-hmm.
really good with this stuff, and but it's like deep stuff.
That's good. Well, this is good information to go through, and I think big message that I took from that paper was if you do a static stretch, don't do it for longer than 60 seconds. Don't do long holds of stretches.
And I'm gonna say 30 seconds because that's what the
Yeah.
research says. Why waste your time, right?
Yeah.
It's like triathletes are already time crunched,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So 30 seconds, move on.
Yeah.
Right? And it's 30 seconds per body group, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not,
Mm-hmm.
I just
Right.
stretch my whole body at
Right.
once, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But and my message is like make it directed. Like
Mm-hmm.
understand what you're doing if you can, and
Yeah.
read about this. But yeah, we're gonna schedule in somebody that can
No.
talk
Good.
about
Good.
that specifically.
Well, I'm glad you found this. This was good. This was good to stretch
Okay,
our thoughts. Oh
that's
my
our
goodness.
thoughts.
I didn't
Okay,
mean
John.
to.
So we got next week. We need to think about ask us anything. I think we teased that 2 weeks
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
So so people on the Facebook page, go ahead and if you want to put in some suggestions. I
Mm-hmm.
will also tell you, John, we're not going to do next Friday. I'm,
Yeah. What's next
I'm
Friday?
traveling next Friday afternoon, evening.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay.
we'll have to schedule a time. But anyways,
Mm-hmm.
if we can get a ask us anything going, that would be great. We love doing those episodes. So that'll be our
Awesome.
next.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Hey, have a great weekend.
Yeah.
Stay,
Stay, keep your feet on the ground.
keep your feet on the ground. Go ride your bike outside tomorrow. Okay.
Right, right. All right. Talk soon.
Bye.